Yo, this movie is insane, dog, and sometimes not always in a good way. Um, about by making capital. This guy again. So, Spider-Man into the Spiderverse. Across the Spiderverse. This is a non-spoiler review, so there will be. I'm not going to be saying anything that is going to ruin the movie for you. Just wanted to give some general thoughts on this movie because it's fascinating to me that this movie got made, and I'd like to see how it pans out, in terms of the box office and everything like that. Because it's a really when you go and see this movie, you'll fully see what I'm talking about. Um, so I want to start off with just a general kind of observation. I'm not sure who went to see Spider-Man, the first one, the Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse. I'm really not sure. But I imagine a lot of kids went to see that movie. And this movie is to kids what the Batman, like to Spider-Man what the Batman is to Batman. And I'm not sure kids will really be thrilled about this movie. Um, uh, it's very complicated, extremely convoluted. Maybe some bright, precocious children might be really kind of dig this movie, but it's really complex, really dense, um, and it it relies on a lot of inside baseball when it comes to Spider-Man. Now, let me tell you something about Spider-Man that's interesting with me. Um, I'm not a huge Spider-Man fan. In fact, he's not even in my top 20 superheroes. Uh, I wish films like this, Across the Spider-Verse, were made for other superheroes who I think are infinitely more interesting and their mythology is infinitely more interesting. But hey, they made it for Spider-Man. And the truth is, although I don't particularly love Spider-Man as a character, nonetheless, he is got one of the best library of live action or big screen movies of any superhero ever. It's probably between him and Batman, in terms of just a collection of really solid big screen outings, everything from Spider-Man 1, Spider-Man 2, um, uh, into the Spider-Verse. I think Spider-Man 3 is actually not that bad, but I'll discount that one for the sake of this argument. Um, he has the MCU Spider-Man movies, which a lot of people love, which I'm not the hugest fan of. But like specifically the one that made like $2 billion or something like that, which was Spider-Man. Um, you know, it was a Spider-Man No Way Home. So those movies, he's got Spider-Man just as a collection of very great movies, and but I'm not a fan of him. So when I see it, I find it hard to get kind of emotionally invested in a Spider-Man movie because I really just don't care that much about the character. I don't like his origin story that much. I think it's wacky. He gets bitten by a radioactive spider, and I know like a lot of superhero origins are wacky, but I feel like um, thank you. Okay. Yeah.
I need this.
Okay, so um, yeah, so I feel like a lot of the superhero stories are wacky, but so I think his ones are like wacky, but they're silly and they're very child oriented. It's not. There's no. I feel like the character lacks depth or meaning or something that he truly stands for. I know he's the neighborhood Spider-Man, and that's what he does. He protects a little neighborhood, and he's not like like the Avengers going off into space necessarily. It's like his thing is to kind of protect his little domain. But nonetheless, whatever you want to say, like, hate, whatever, Spider-Man has some of the best games, some of the best animated cartoons, shows, movies, etc. People love Spider-Man. And this film, no doubt, is a love letter to all of those Spider-Man fans. And I think if you're really a big Spider-Man fan, you're gonna kind of eat this up. So, what are my feelings towards it? Now, I'll split it into the negative first, then I'm going to go to the positive, and then I'm going to kind of give my overall grade. So, the negatives of this is I think there's a whole hour and 20 minutes of this movie that is really just very hard to get into. I think it's quite boring in the beginning. I think the humor doesn't land. I think some of the exchanges between the parents and him are awful. They try to be comedic, and I'm not even talking about comedic in an MCU way. They try their own style of comedy, but it just doesn't land. It doesn't work. Um, for me, for other people, it might do, but it just seemed almost less funny than Super Pets. I think back to Super Pets and some of the comedy in that, and I'm like, actually, some of the comedy was better in that. And the pacing of that film was actually better. Another thing, this is a very artsy movie. This is like almost art. They took everything from the first movie, and in terms of the construction of the artwork, and they ramped it up so that it kind of looks like a kind of Banksy-esque, like the graffiti artist Banksy, kind of mix between his style of graffiti and then mixed with the so yeah, mixed with his style of graffiti and 3D animation. So the style is interesting, but it also is it's disjointed in this movie to the point where like every frame seems like it could be from a different animated movie, and sometimes that works because when they're going into the multiverse, there's like no spoilers, but like they go into very different types of multiverse where the medium is different, which was enjoyable and kind of like, whoa, they did that. They're bonkers. That's crazy. I've never seen that done before. So they went from, like 3D animation to other types of, animation, say. Um, and so when that was happening, it worked. But it was happening all through, even when they were just in, say, their specific Earth. And so it was really like, a lot to take in. And I think for kids, it's going to be a lot to take in. I'm not sure kids are going to like this movie. I'm going to be honest. And then, so there's the this stuff with the parents and him and the comedy that doesn't really quite work. It's a little bit kind of confusing visually. The other things about the film I didn't really like. I thought the pacing was really off. It took a long time to really get to the point and the meat and substance of what this film was about. And I know it's a part one and part two, but the meat and substance of what this film was about was not really explored until, goddamn, like 3/4 of the way into the movie. I really, I think the ambition of this movie is extraordinary, and I applaud the ambition, and I hope that comic book movies continue to have this kind of ambition, because this is the kind of thing that can shut critics up about how, everything has been said in superhero movies. There's superhero fatigue. I think this is funnily enough, one of the best years for superhero movies. If we look at this movie, we look at Shazam 2. In fact, it's been two of the best years for superhero movies. But we look at Shazam 2. We look at, there was one Marvel movie that I actually really liked. Oh, right, Guardians of the Galaxy 3. All of those movies were excellent, and last year you had the Batman. So I don't think comic book movies are running out of ideas at all. I think there's some really good stuff there, and I think critics are being overly harsh on them. But this movie, as I said, is, I think, catnip for critics in terms of its artistic kind of merit, what it's going for, just the ballsiness of its ambition. To explore the Spider-Man universe in all its mediums, whether it be film, comic books, cartoons, all of it is kind of explored and commented on in this kind of, meta way. So the storytelling, even though the pacing is off, I think the story is actually really unique and interesting and good. A couple of characters I just grated my nerves were really the parents, and then this character Spot, played by Jason Schwartzman. These characters really didn't work for me. And the other thing I'll say is the exploration of the multiverses. Like, they come up with a really interesting concept of a character from one of these multiverses right in the beginning of the film. And I'm like, whoa, I want to go to that world, and I want to see worlds like that. But once again, kind of like, Spider-Man No Way Home, kind of like, what other multiverse movies have there been? There's been a few multiverse movies. Ant-Man, Quantumania, those kind of things. I don't think this one has done it the best so far in terms of exploring different types of worlds that could exist in the multiverse. It's done it by far the best. However, it still doesn't, explore them to the degree that one would think, especially when you bring up these kind of interesting characters. There's a character in this called Spider-Punk, who's a British Spider-Man who's also like a punk rocker. That's not a spoiler. It's actually, the character is played by Daniel Kaluuya, Spider-Punk, and he's really interesting. And you're just like, oh, it would be nice to see some of the worlds that these characters come from and explore them in a little bit more depth. So that was kind of disappointing. What else didn't I like? There's a lot I liked about this movie, but I did find a lot of it boring. And maybe that's because I'm not a huge Spider-Man fan, and I'm not the audience for this. And it's not like a kid's movie where you can just like sit along and kind of, this is one of the things I would say is the storytelling reminded me of some of the anime kind of manga storytelling. It's very, I feel like this film is very, very influenced by these kind of sprawling epic manga films, um, uh, where the thread of the narrative gets so convoluted and complex. And I know a lot of kids like that these days. But, you know, the story was almost better than the kind of characterization of the characters in this film, in terms of like what they're saying, their dialogue, how it's acted. It all seems a little bit cheaper than the story they're trying to tell. And I noticed that happens a lot in anime as well. By the way, if you've got any questions for me about the movie, do ask any questions. So now I want to go to some of the positives. One positive, the music. The music I loved in this movie. Obviously, they're going with that kind of hip hop, urban kind of style of music. It played a really cool track that got me like going right in the beginning of the movie, and I wasn't expecting it. It was a really cool track to play. And so the music was fantastic in this movie. Um, uh, and the score was actually really, really good. The original score for the movie was really good as well. So that's the first thing. Performances wise, I'm not going to say I loved any of the performances. I felt like the performances were much more genuine in the first movie. They seemed more real, more down to earth. This one seemed very, like it was more hyper or more exaggerated in terms of the performances and acting. Did anyone stand out for me in terms of the performances? I guess maybe Shamir Moore, who plays the Spider-Man, Miles Morales, and Daniel Kaluuya. Those were the two that were most entertaining, but some of the performances felt a little bit off, especially the dad of Miles Morales felt a little bit off. These long, kind of drawn out conversations between them. It's like they have a conversation, and you're just like, I get the point, of this conversation. I get it. I get the emotional kind of weight you're trying to put behind this conversation. But then the conversation keeps on going and going and going. A lot of that happens between Miles Morales and his father. A lot of that happens between Spider-Woman, who I'm not even sure who plays her out of this cast. But a lot of that happens with Spider-Woman and her father. That just it brings the story to a whole. And I know you don't want to just go straight to the action. You want to be emotionally invested in the characters so that the action makes sense to you. But quite honestly, everything in this movie felt drawn out, elongated. It reminded me of Everything Everywhere All at Once, like a cartoon animated version of that, but with Spider-Man in it. And that film's really, really good, but that film feels like it needs a half hour shaved off it for just unnecessary elongated scenes. Same with the action in this movie. The action just seems so drawn out. Like, I get it, you want to do the most crazy action in the world, but eventually it just turns into a mess, especially when the animated style of the action scenes is changing every frame, right? So you've got Spider-Man shooting, hanging onto a building, but then the way the building visually looks is changed, and then he's glitching, and then, all of this visual stimulation. I mean, this is an epileptic person's nightmare in terms of the movie. Absolutely a fucking if you're epileptic, don't go and see this movie. um Just a warning, you will You'll get, it will explode your brain or something. Um, so um, but moving on again to the good parts, because I do in the end. Let me just give you a spoiler. I like the movie. Um, it took me time to kind of digest it, but all in all, I think this is the type of movie that comic book movies should be going towards. I think it's laudable. I wouldn't be surprised if it gets some kind of Oscar nomination again, maybe even a win for Best Animated Movie, because it's much more artistic than even the first one. Um, you know, um, it almost seems avant-garde. Uh, but, let's not go crazy here. When they start talking about it being better than The Dark Knight, it's not even better than the first movie. I like Into the Spider-Verse, to be honest. Um, it feels like part one of, like when we see part two, because this isn't a spoiler either. This story is a two-parter. That kind of leaves you on somewhat of a cliffhanger you'd be interested in. But I'm not going to be rushing to the cinemas to see, what happens or something like that because of the cliffhanger in this. It's not. I guess it's not on the level of a cliffhanger, say Infinity War, right? It's like everyone dies or something like that. But um, what I will say is that um, it leaves some intriguing things that could happen in the second movie that didn't happen in this movie. So I'm glad that this is just the first part. And so some of my disappointments in terms of traveling through the multiverse and stuff like that, I think is going to be rectified in the second movie, because I think what they wanted to set up in this movie was kind of the emotional stakes of the story. And that's what the film does really, really well in the last hour. The emotional stakes. You finally go, like, after watching this movie, thinking, what is this about? Like, why am I watching this movie? Is it just because I like Spider-Man? Like, god damn, this has gone on for an hour and a half. Finally, in the second half, you finally get the emotional stakes of this movie, and they are weighty and they are interesting, and they say something interesting about the Spider-Man mythos, and they're everything that No Way Home should have been. This movie is 1,000 times better than No Way Home. So if you like No Way Home and you're a fan of Spider-Man in that, and you want kind of fan service but done well, this is the fact. Actually, one of the pluses I was going to say is the Spider-Man fan service in this is incredible. Um, you know, every single. If you love Spider-Man and you've read his comics, you've seen the cartoons, and you've seen the movies, then this is going to be special for you in terms of how it engages with the mythology of Spider-Man. And I'm telling you, the emotional stakes that are brought up by the central plot point of what the story moving forward is going to be about are really, really interesting. And, you know, Miles is given something that will be a moral decision that he has to make. And this conflict he has is a conflict that he's having with people that you might not expect him to be having this conflict with. I'm not going to give that away, but like certain people um, in this film that you would think surely should be allied with Miles Morales on what he wants to do are not allied with him, and there is a genuine argument that perhaps what he wants to do is questionable. Um, so there's this really, really interesting, and unfortunately, that happens. Like as I said, like it felt like 1 hour and 30 minutes into the film before this reveal, and I think that's what people are talking about when critics are saying, "Wow, this is just a great movie. This is this. This is that." This is on the Dark Knight level. I think they're just talking about that last hour of the movie. which is exciting and it's ballsy as fuck. And I love the fact that they made this a part 1 and 2. As I said, I'm not a Spider-Man fan, so I'm not going to be rushing to the cinemas to see the third part. But I'll probably catch it in the cinemas. Um, and I think that was really ballsy. Make it part, of a two-parter, just the way it is, like reading a comic. And that's another thing I'll say about this movie. This is really like, in the best way possible, like one of those edgier, more mature graphic novels brought to life. And I love when comic book movies do that. Nolan did that in some ways. Zack Snyder's Justice League. In fact, all of Zack Snyder's, like Watchmen and this kind of stuff, did that. Some to greater success than others. But at least they brought the kind of that kind of feeling of what the comic book movie, sorry, what a comic book is, what it's like to read a comic book. They really brought that in this movie, potentially better than a lot of other comic book movies. Is this the best animated superhero movie? No, I actually think Megamind, which is not a very famous he's not a comic book character. He doesn't come from the comic books. But in terms of animated movies, I think Megamind is better. I think the Flashpoint is more engaging and entertaining, perhaps a little less ambitious than this movie. But Flashpoint Paradox, the DC movie, animated movie, is better. Dark Knight Returns is better. The Batman movie. So all of those movies are better. But in terms of cinematic ones, I would say Megamind is better. And I think Into the Spider-Verse is a little bit better and more coherent and more engaging than this movie. It's, to be honest, it's a challenging movie to watch, much like Everything Everywhere All at Once. I think some people will be like, wow, this is really fascinating. This is cool that they're doing so many different things. But sometimes you can get lost in doing so much different that you forget about just engaging your audience, and what your audience is. Because as I said, I don't think children can watch this movie. This is a movie for adults. It's straight up a movie for adults. I mean, even live action movies, like live action superhero movies, are more for kids than this movie. Which is funny, like you think like that's an audience they want to go for in terms of comic book movies that are animated. You think they'd want to go for a child-friendly movie. Like I would say Super Pets was easier for me to watch and easier for me to get into. Like, oh, this is what the story is. It's very clear. This movie, not so much. But as I said, once it gets into its stride, hour and a half into it, and you finally see why you've been seeing all this chaotic mess on screen and what the actual story is and what the stakes are. I wish they had got to that a lot earlier, because then this movie would have been a straight 9 out of 10. As it stands, I'm going to give it a 7.5 or B plus in terms of a movie. I think it's really, really good. I don't think it's quite as good as, say, Guardians 3. I prefer, a lot of people are going to say I'm crazy, but I prefer Shazam 2 to this movie. But then I think that's it. I think for this year, looking at the superhero movies 2023, I would say this is the third best one. Let me just check. So so far this year, I watched this Legion of Superheroes. That was a weird movie. I didn't really like it. So far this year, we've got Shazam! Fury of the Gods, Guardians of the Galaxy 3, Quantum Mania, and Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse. So yeah, the way I would rank these at the moment is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, a slightly number one, Shazam! Fury of the Gods number 2, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse number 3, and only by a little bit. Again, these top 3 are really, really good. Quantum Mania, that's where you get a little bit of a dip and fall there. So yeah, that's how I would rank them. I imagine the Flash is going to be a little bit more audience, friendly in terms of new people coming to see this superhero movies for the first time. I think a lot of people will dig this again, but I don't know if it will reach that audience, because when you look at like an animated movie, you think, oh, this is going to be for kids, and families are going to walk into this, 95%. They should say, like, this movie is not for kids. I think it will help it a lot, because I think families are going to walk into this just being like, wow, this is long and drawn out, and the jokes aren't funny in the first half. So if I feel like that, maybe some other people might feel like that. But the surprises, the fan service, the music, so the fan service, the music, the ambition of this movie, all of that is great. Does it explore the multiverse enough? Much like Doctor Strange and the Multiverse, I feel like could have done with a few little other bits, exploring the multiverse rather than these long, drawn-out scenes of like emotional weight between Spider-Man, his father, and Gwen Stacy and her father, and all of that kind of stuff. I could have done with a little bit less. Like, it could have, you could have got the point across that there's a very emotional thing going on between them, without like drawing it out as much as they did. And I think those are some of the weakest parts of the movie. It's just like, oh my God, they're going to talk again. Gwen Stacy and her father are going to talk again. And Gwen Stacy is, I'll say one thing as well. I thought I was watching a Gwen Stacy movie when this film started. I was like, where's Miles? Like, I don't understand. Is this a Spider-Woman or Spider-Gwen movie? Because she takes up a lot of runtime in the beginning, and it's like, this should be Miles's story, and I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm saying that even in the sense of once you find out, towards the end, what this story really is about, it's very Miles-centric. And I'm just like, a lot of the stuff you could have, with Gwen and her father, you could have really dealt with that, like, briefly, and you would have got the point. And the extensive fight scenes as well. I mean, like, I get it. You want to up the ante from the last movie, but it was just too long. These fight scenes were too fucking long, and they had already been like done amazing things, interesting things with the fight choreography and stuff like that. You didn't need it to go on for like, each fight scene to go on for what felt like 10 minutes or something like that each time. And there were a lot of them. So that's my kind of review on Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse. Very good movie. A lot of flaws. I think people are capping a little bit too much. This is not, Dark Knight or even like. So let me think in terms of Spider-Man movies. Which Spider-Man movies do I like more? I like Spider-Man 2 more. I actually like Spider-Man 3 more than this, but I might be in the minority. I like Into the Spider-Verse more than this. It's better than all the crappy MCU Spider-Man movies. Definitely better than No Way Home. I'd say it's about on par with, for different reasons, because both movies have their own weaknesses. But the Amazing Spider-Man one, I would say this movie's on par with that. In some ways, it's much, much better, but in its weaknesses, it's much, much weaker. And Amazing Spider-Man 1 is much easier to get into. It's just like a breeze, and you just watch it and it's cool. So, yeah, that's my kind of general opinion on this movie. It took me a long time to kind of digest what exactly I thought about it. But in the end, I think I came down on the side of, yeah, this is pretty good, pretty decent start to a two-part film. And depending on where it goes from here, this could become like, really all-time classic trilogy. But I suspect that when all is said and done, this might be the weakest entry into that trilogy. I think Into the Spider-Verse was a little bit better, and I think from what it's set up story-wise, the next movie, if it just goes straight from what it's set up story-wise, and get straight into it in the next movie, then I think the next movie is going to be way better than this one. And also, this one didn't have certain characters I liked from the first Into the Spider-Verse, and it seems like in the third one they will bring back those characters that I liked. So that's another plus. So yeah. A lot of the alternate version Spider-Mans in this movie just weren't as cool as the alternate Spider-Man versions in the last movie. So I'm kind of looking forward to seeing those guys meet each other. But, that's me. And that's it. Good movie, 7.5. Comic book movies, there's been a good couple of years. Keep it going, Hollywood. I think you can shut some of the critics up. This stuff is good stuff. So yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that. I'll see you on the flip side, and I love you 3000. Peace.